Welcome back to the Exempt List. I'm your host, Charles McDonald. Today, we are talking about NFL draft sleepers, some SEC quarterbacks, and we're going to be joined by ESPN's Jordan Reid, NFL draft extraordinaire, and we'll be right back with the start of the show. Welcome to the Exempt List, part of the Zero Blitz podcast family. I'm your host, Charles McDonald, and today, joined by a very special guest. If you watch ESPN around this time of year, I'm sure you've seen him on TV plenty of times. My buddy Jordan Reid covers the NFL draft. Does a great job. Love seeing him on TV and killing it every week. Jordan, how are things going, my man?
It's good. It's always a pleasure being here, and I love when we're able to do our podcast together.
Yeah, it's a good time. I feel like where I can be a bit of a loose cannon sometimes, you're a little bit more centered. And I really appreciate that, not just with you, but with a bunch of people that are in my life. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And today we're going to start off with little upcoming draft talk. I think we're just about a month on the dot from the first round of the upcoming NFL draft. I think we're pretty entrenched on, Caleb Williams go number one. We'll see how the rest of the top 10 shakes out with the other quarterbacks that are going to go slated, projected to go in the first round. But, around this time of year, everyone's talked about the first round prospects. We all know who's going to go, projected to go in the first round. I'm sure there'll be some surprises on draft day, like there always are. But for the most part, we've kind of talked out the guys who are going to be at the top of the draft. So I want to talk with you more about guys who have, maybe not first round guys, lower end, second to third, fourth round guys who still have a chance to make an impact in the NFL. So we're each going to go over five. And I want you to start off because, you're really in the weeds with this stuff. So give me a quote unquote draft sleeper for people to get excited about.
So my first one is Malik Washington. He's a wide receiver from Virginia. And he's one that is really, really intriguing. Now, they predominantly played him in the slot. And the first 3 years of his career, he spent at Northwestern. So he was one of those receivers that kind of was hidden in that offense. And we both know Northwestern doesn't have the greatest quarterback play. So he's one of those late bloomer, one of those players that was a little bit hidden in a sense. Mm-hmm. But what you love about him is that he's very strong at the catch point. He's a little bit undersized at about 5'8", right around 190 pounds. But you're watching him at the Shrine Bowl and you're like, man, this is one of the best players, if not the best player here, without question. So I was a big fan of him. If I had to predict, he'll probably go third or fourth round if I had to guess right now. But it would not surprise me if he ends up being a starter somewhere, probably somewhere as somebody's wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I think like someone like Malik Washington is kind of interesting because that reminds me of like the tiers, I guess, of like quarterback play. Because even if you're someone like Malik Washington and you go from Northwestern where, the offensive play is, maybe third most important thing to the team as a whole. And even if you can just get to someone like Brennan Armstrong, who's not like a real NFL prospect, but is quality enough where you can like run an offense and kind of get things popping off. Like that can be somewhere where you can have success in looking at the transfer portal in general and how guys can kind of, change their lives to a degree as far as like the transfer portal goes. Cause we look at a guy, even like, like Tez Walker at UNC, with his jersey going from Kent State to A&T and then the UNC, getting to play with someone like Drake May kind of helps put him on the maps as far as like, being an NFL prospect goes. So I think that those journeys are interesting and we should just see more of them like as the transfer portal becomes more of a factor in, in college football. What are your thoughts really, I guess, on like how the transfer portal has impacted the draft so far and where you kind of see it taking places in the future?
What's really funny to me, and you can attest to this. Remember like 5 or 6 years ago when we were really getting into the draft, if somebody transferred like 2 or 3 times, it was seen as a huge nod for them. It's like, why is he transferring so many times? Like, what happened? Was it the coach? Was it the player? Like, what are some of the background things that are going on? But now we're seeing guys transfer 2, 3, even 4 times. But now with the transfer portal and NIL, it's added another layer to evaluations, just because guys are transferring for favorable variables, I would call it, for lack of better terms, just because of money situations, playing time, and then some other things that could happen in their career. So transferring really isn't seen as a knock anymore. It's more so of just trying to figure out the story behind it and what happened with it. But where we've seen it really affect the NFL draft is that, and I like to use it from a quarterback standpoint. Let's say you're projected to go 6th or 7th round as a quarterback. Let's say, I'll just use a guy, for example, like Keaton Slovis for somebody. If I'm Keaton Slovis, why would I not stay in college and get $1 million plus money in NIL as opposed to being a barely draftable guy or even going undrafted and potentially making a non-guaranteed 600 to 700K? It just makes sense to stay in college if I'm him. So financially, it's had a huge effect on the NFL draft, but also the declaration numbers of draft eligible guys have dwindled over the past 5 years or so. So that's where we're seeing a huge improvement, a huge effect in the NFL draft.
I think one of the craziest like transfer draft related things to me this year is what happened at Ohio State, like where you get Trayvon Henderson back, Denzel Burke, the cornerback back. Then, like, dude, this team is loaded. I think, when you hear some of the stories behind the scenes and how much money, I think we've all caught on to the NIL money that guys are getting to go from high school to college. But I think an under talked about thing is how much money these kids are getting to come back to school too. Like, hey, you really might see something that is comparable to like a year one base salary in the NFL at some of these schools like Ohio State and Georgia, trying to figure out like how much money these kids are getting to come back and not declare for the draft. Because like you said, dude, a 54 number early entrance, like number for, the amount of guys that are declaring early for the draft, that's something that 5 years ago would probably cause alarm for a lot of people. Like, why don't these kids want to go to the NFL draft? Well, now, because if you're playing at a big enough school, you might get NFL money to stick around for 1 or 2 more years. So like you said, I think the transfer portal, NIL, all that stuff is really interesting in the way it's going to, end up developing college football and for the NFL, because I don't think that you'll ever see a case where, someone's projected to go number 1 and they decide to go back to school for the NIL money, because it's not at that point yet. But if you're, a late first round guy and you're looking at a base salary year one at like $2 million, $3 million, you might be able to get that if you go back to school at some of these spots. Like actually. So I think that's going to be interesting. But back to sleepers. Speaking of a big time school, and I would be remiss if I did this without talking about the Georgia Bulldogs. But Javon Bullard, the safety, I've been such a big fan of his game for such a long time. And I kind of have like a soft spot for these kind of defensive backs where it's not like super great, maybe at any one thing. You're not a home run hitter as an athlete. You're not the biggest guy out there, but you just, for lack of a better term, you just get done out there. You can cover in the slide, cover deep, make tackles in the open field, and maybe he's not going to be a first or a second round guy, but I feel like he's kind of one of those plug and play glue guys in the secondary that if you have some other pieces around him, you can kind of help take you to the next level. So
I was at Pro Day at Georgia a couple of weeks ago, and just watching him move around, like you could tell that he was different. Like everything was just so effortless. But what I love about him is that as a DB, I've always said that half the battle of transitioning to the NFL is confidence. Like I love DBs that just talk junk, like Jair Alexander, Jalen Ramsey, all these dudes, but you have to back it up, of course. But I just think half the battle when you step onto the NFL field is just confidence with a DB. And that's the type of infectious energy that I got from him. And he reminds me so much of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for some reason.
Ooh, I like that.
I don't know if it's the movement skills, the physicality, the versatility that he plays with, but not saying that he's Chauncey off the field, but on the field, just strictly talk about his playing style. He reminds me so much of him coming out. And I think he's going to have that type of effect on the secondary. And I mean, we saw the impact that he's had throughout his career. But what I love about him is that he's played star, he's played free safety, he's played nickel, he's played strong safety. He's played so many different positions. So now it's like, let's just roll him out there. It doesn't even matter what position he plays in the secondary because nothing's going to be new to him. So I'm with you with Bullard. I like him a lot.
Yeah, and I think he answered some questions about maybe the long speed by running, low 4.4s, low 4.5, high 4.4s. So that should help him out. I just kind of like you said, those guys that just play a little bit of everywhere. Because even when you look at Bullard stuff, the only position where I would say, hey, you probably don't want to put him out there is like outside cornerback. But any other spot, I think he can play for you in a pinch. And some of those guys are so valuable as we see, moving forward. Because I think one of the most interesting things about where the NFL is right now is how cheap some of like these nickel corners are. You look at what Teron Johnson got from Buffalo, 3 years, $31 million. And I find that kind of baffling because the amount of, value as we see, offense become more and more RPO centric or, trying to attack open space, having a dog at your slot position who can come in and fit the run and make tackles in the open field seems like, a pretty valuable piece to me. But for whatever reasons, the finances haven't caught up to that. So, I think even if you can get someone like a Javon Bullard and have them come in and start for a few years, that's turned into like a pretty big source of value as far as like you're building your rosters out. I was reluctant to go watch UConn film because they're UConn and they haven't been very, very good or very fun to watch. But, I think the past couple of years, they've produced some guys. Travis Jones, defensive tackle, he's gotten to a nice start with his career with the Ravens. And now they have another, an offensive lineman this time, Christian Haynes, who he really stands out amongst the rest of the UConn offensive line, I would say. I think when you look at his tape, he's really explosive in a way that you don't see from, a lot of college guards, especially a lot of guards who are playing on this level of college football. I think really what gets me excited is like watching the zone blocks and the reach blocks and seeing where he can kind of use his athleticism to get on the move and get people moving and get to the second level. I've become a pretty big fan of his game by watching him play over the past few days. And, as we start working, me and Charles Robinson start putting together this all juice team and coming up with the final selections, I'm going to push pretty hard for him to make it because I think that he's a guy that, you might be able to grab him on day 2. And the next thing you know, you're lining him up for a second deal because he's been that integral to your offensive line. So I'm a pretty big fan of his game.
I'm right there with you. And I will be the conductor of him making the all juice team just because he's so explosive, man. It's been funny seeing. So how I do it is I track all these guys throughout the season just because if I try to play catch up at the end of the year and just watch multiple games on all these dudes, I'll just be way behind. So I remember at the beginning of the season watching that NC State game, and I'm actually watching NC State's defense. And this guard just keeps popping every single time, just absolutely throwing dudes to the ground. So that's one game that always sticks in my mind with Christian Haynes of kind of discovering him at the beginning of the season. But the thing about him is that I wanted to write about him going into the Senior Bowl just because I thought if he had a huge Senior Bowl, he probably could go inside the top 75 just because everybody wanted to see how would he handle some of the interior defensive linemen from, Georgia, Alabama, these SEC, these Big Ten schools? How would he handle that bump up in speed and then that bump up in competition that he didn't see week in and week out? But what you come to find out is that he's super strong. His hands are really good. He has positional flexibility. He's played both guard spots, but some people wanted to see him snap. He snapped a little bit at the Senior Bowl, playing some center, which was a huge question mark for him going into the week. You always want to see if they have that versatility. And I think he's capable of doing that. But what I love the most about him is that he plays so poised. A lot of times with interior defenders, you kind of see them falling to the ground or their hands are sloppy. You never get that sense from him. So he's always in control. He's super strong. He has that wide body that you love to see at the position too. So I'm right there with you. Like I could see him going. It wouldn't surprise me. Like if he goes in the top 60, like that would not surprise me at all. So mid-second round, I think that's probably where he ends up going, just because he's checked so many boxes throughout the pre-draft process. And I think he'd be a starter from day one without question.
Yeah. I'm excited for him because it's funny. I saw something on fancy Twitter the other day. I know I shouldn't be rummaging around there. But there was someone scoffing at the idea that someone could be like a better player in the pros than they were in college. So I'm like, man, I don't know. Sometimes when you start playing around, not to be mean, but like guys who are caliber player that you are, it makes life a little bit easier for you, even as you ramp up a competition. So, I'm pretty excited for him. What's another guy that you've been thinking about as, a sleeper for this draft?
I actually had Haynes on my list. So my next name was and this absolutely. And this is a name that had a lot of first round steam coming into the year, but he's kind of fallen off. And that's Jayden Bullock from USC, safety. He's one that is a little bit of a polarizing prospect, just because everybody has it ingrained into their memory of just him missing tackle after tackle against Tulane in the bowl game last year.
I'm about to say the Jay Spears game that got everyone on board was a really bad game for Jayden Bullock.
Yeah. So really that's bad game. The lasting memory that everybody has ingrained in the mind of Jayden Bullock. But when you just strictly look at his tape from a coverage standpoint, like his range is absolutely unbelievable. He's that true traditional single high free safety. And I know the game has kind of moved away from that. We're seeing a lot of two high defenses, but there's still some teams that do like to play that cover one or cover three and like to have that middle of the field, what I call inaccuracy eraser from a middle of the field safety standpoint. So his evaluation is a little bit difficult just because the tackling is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of teams. But if you're looking for a true center field type of safety that you can quote unquote hide a little bit in the run game if you don't force him to come downhill and be that last line of defense, I think he can be a steal like the third or the fourth round without question. I don't know if he's going to go that late just because of the range and the coverage skills and the ball skills are so good. But if you can kind of hide him a little bit and play him 15 to 20 yards off at just strictly free safety, I think he could be a starter.
Yeah. He's a guy that's definitely pretty polarizing. I will say that from my own group chats, plus just like conversations you have with people who are like actually scouting these things for NFL teams. I think that he's probably pretty polarizing. But I tend to find guys like that interesting because I think the most true thing about draft season is it only takes one team. It only takes one team to pull the trigger on you because, I think league consensus is important as far as figuring things out. But, the one that comes to mind to me all the time is when the Raiders picked Cleveland Farrell at 4 overall, like the first Mike Mayock and John Gruden drafts. And that, to me, that's a peak of it only takes one team because I don't know if the other 31 teams were on that high. But, Jayden Bullock, if you want to look at him from a more optimistic point of view, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going like day 2, just based off like some of like the flashes you get. And I will say, if you really want to like cope here with some like the tackling stuff, he was not the only person on USC's defense that had tackling issues. Not even close. So maybe that you could argue that that's a coaching problem, a structural problem, and that's something that can be fixed moving forward. I don't know where this next guy falls in terms of like the sleeper tier or the sleeper discussion, but Brandon Dorlus from Oregon, I really like his game. I haven't gotten a good feel on like what his draft projection is because I kind of see him all over the place in terms of, I've seen him like top of the second in mock drafts. I've seen him in the 4th round. So I'm just going to put him on the sleepers list. But I think he's just a tough big, athletic kind of guy. To me, he reminds me of the defensive lineman that the Ravens have really coveted over the past, let's call it 20 years, or maybe, about 20 years, ever since they moved away from like the huge nose tackles and started going more towards like Brent Urban kind of players, like your 6'7", 6'6", 300-pound guy that can play inside and out. I like him. I don't know if Brandon Doris will ever be like a perennial Pro Bowl type guy, but he's one of those guys where I look at him like, I wouldn't be surprised if we look back and said, damn, he played for 11 years. He's on a lot of good defenses, made some big plays and big moments, and was just a key contributor. I'm a pretty big fan of his game, and I'm excited to see like what team ends up drafting, because I think he's another guy where fit is so important. I don't know if he's just like a classic 4-3 guy or a classic 3-4 guy. I think he's going to need to play for a guy or a defensive line coach that has some creativity in how to deploy him.
Yeah, I love Dorless. He actually was another one that was on my list. So once again, on the same accord, I think the biggest issue is that you just don't know where to play them. And we talk about those tweeners all the time, how they can be dangerous just because if you don't play them in the right spot, they can fizzle out just because you never find a distinct role for them. And he's not as big, but he reminds me of, you remember the Marvin Leal? Remember that name from Texas A&M?
Yeah, I do remember him. Yeah.
Now I think Dorless is a better prospect than what he was coming out, but with Leal, like he was getting top 10 talk when he was coming out, but he ended up going like, I think 3rd round, if I'm not mistaken, to the Steelers. Yeah. So with those tweeners or those guys that you don't know where to play them, that's always the issue. And once again, it only takes one team to take them, but like his growth last season was absolutely unbelievable. I think he was one of the better players on Oregon's defense last year. And the big worry with him was that he just wasn't stout against the run. He never used his hands. So he just didn't know how. But for whatever reason, it just magically clicked for him last year. You're seeing him stacking
Dan the man landing.
Doing everything. Yeah, doing everything. Yeah. So I think his draft projection is really, really interesting. But like somebody like the Seahawks, like I could see Mike McDonald falling in love with him and taking him on day 2 just because he's that tight. Once again, you talked about the Ravens, him not being with the Seahawks. He definitely fits with what they're trying to do. So him going somewhere top 60, I had to guess right now, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up going, top of the 2nd round, like something like that wouldn't surprise me with him just because you don't know where to play him, but just the potential and the development has been so good with him. He's one of those players that you'd love to take a chance on.
Yeah, and I think start talking about like tweeners on the defensive line, the where you use stout is so important because, look, I think we fall in love sometimes with, these guys who can play inside and out. And like Solomon Thomas, to me, is such a great example of this back at Stanford, where you fall in love with the flash plays, being able to get up the field, being able to be explosive, being able to get sacks. But like the more translatable plays is because you're not going to get upfield at that same rate in the NFL. You're just not. It's not going to happen. The offensive lines are too good, too talented, and schemes are too good. I think more importantly is like figuring out the guys who don't get blown off the ball, which is why like Trayvon Walker from Georgia was interesting a few years ago because he was playing inside. He was playing over centers at 270, but he was still holding his weight and eating double teams and doing stuff you really don't see guys that are that weight doing. Michael Bennett, when he played with the Seahawks, another one. Like the balance to be able to play, the balance and the strength to be able to play inside of 270 is pretty tough. And I think Dorless might be one of those guys where he can, stand tall against some of the more heavy offensive lines and not get blown off the ball, because it's all fun and games like to build out these NASCAR packages and have a 285-pound defensive tackle until he's sitting in the linebacker's laps on the power play.
Yeah.
And
so somebody runs right.
Yeah. Not, oh wait, whoa, 6 yards of carry. We weren't asking for this. Let's see. Let's do a couple more here before we get on to an ad break and talk about some of the rule changes in the NFL this week. Audric Estime from Notre Dame, the running back. I'm a fan of him. He's one of those guys that I really struggle with come draft season because, like, I've obviously when you go back, you watch Notre Dame's offense for like Joe Alt or Blake Fisher, the other offensive tackle. You're going to catch some running back too. And the first thing that pops out about Estime is he's big as hell. And then I start watching him play more. And he's got like runs where he's, breaking away from the defense and gashing guys and getting downhill and picking up steam. Then he gets to the combine and he runs a 4.72. I think on both runs, he hit about a 4.72. And Notre Dame Pro Day happens last week, and he improved that time to a 4.54. So we're probably somewhere in the middle there, maybe a 4.6, a low 4.6, which I think is okay when you're talking about like a 230-pound back. But this is where I struggle sometimes with, like, I've seen him break away and I've seen him get big runs and I've seen him be difficult to tackle in the open field. And then I see a 4.7 40, which is also a piece of information that should be taken into account when you're, projecting these guys for the NFL. So I'm excited for him. I think he's like probably, with the offseason athletic testing, probably closer to like that day 2, day 3 flip now. But I'm still in. I think I'm going to ignore the 40 time and be all in on this team.
This is why GPS data has become so crucial in NFL evaluations, just because there may be a guy that goes out there, like Keon Coleman is a great example, another great example this year of where nobody projected that he was going to run 4.61. A lot of people were saying, maybe 4.55 or 4.52, somewhere in that range. But he goes out and he runs the gauntlet and has the fastest speed of any receiver. And the first thing that they did, they said, oh, Puka Nacua did the same exact thing last year. He had high GPS data, but he ran low to mid 4.5s. But when he got to the gauntlet, he was the fastest and the most crisp of anybody. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that really take your route, that really trust what they see on tape. And then the GPS data, I don't have any access to his GPS data, but just trusting what they see on tape as far as him breaking away from people and detaching from defensive backs on the open field, which is something that is consistent on his tape. But whenever you're a big running back like that, you have to be able to run through contact, and then also being able to break tackles. So I think that's something that is a big differentiator when you're talking about, especially in this running back class, of where there's no Bijan Robinson, there's no Jahmyr Gibbs. We were really spoiled with that draft class last year early on. There just isn't that type in this group. But when it comes to a tiebreaker, I'm going to take the dude that's big, runs fast, and breaks tackles. That's going to be the differentiator for a lot of teams. So I could see him being one of the first running backs taken off of the board. But I think something that's going to be huge for teams is that just how much can he develop in the passing game? Can he be consistent as a pass protector? Can he catch the ball out of the backfield? Not saying that he has to be Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara. You're not going to involve him in the passing game like that, but can he be reliable on a swing or a check down, or is he just what I like to call a zero, or where we have to take him off the field in the passing game just because he can't catch the ball, or he's just not dynamic or consistent enough to include him to be a +1 in the passing game? So I think that's going to be the key point in his evaluation. But as far as the running aspect, I mean, we both know he has that down pat, but I could see somebody like the Ravens will love him. The Steelers will love him. Teams that just line up in 12 personnel, double tight ends, and just smash mouth football. Like Harbaugh is going to absolutely love him with the Chargers. I'm sure they're going to take it back somewhere day 2, day 3 with Eckler gone now. So just those type of running backs, there's still value in the NFL. It's just a matter of what is the key point, or what are the boxes that he can check in the passing game. I think that's going to be the thing that determines how high he actually goes.
I agree. I just started thinking about Derrick Henry and Audric and Lamar, and holy, that would be awful to play against. That's one of those games where you're like, all right, we need to double up on the ice bats afterwards, because that's real grown man football right there. One last thing before we get to a couple quarterback prospects. Give me your favorite HBCU prospect that you scouted this time around.
My favorite one right now, his name is Mikey Victor. He's a cornerback from Alabama State, and he actually was at Alabama's Pro Day, and he performed really well. So he's about 6'3", 209 pounds. So I think that's what he came in as. I don't think he's a corner on the next level. I think he's probably going to have to transition to safety. Really good ball skills, has a really interesting journey. Started off at a junior college, then transferred to UNLV, and then came to Alabama State. But he actually was at the East-West Shrine Bowl, and I thought he played really well. I don't think he's a draftable guy right now, but I definitely think he's going to be a priority free agent for a lot of teams, just because that big, that size, then also having really good ball skills. And then also standing out at Alabama's Pro Day, which is really hard for an FCS or HBCU prospect, especially having Kool-Aid and then also Tyrion Arnold. I think that helped him in a sense, just because all the scouts are coming to watch those guys. So him going through those DB drills with those players, I think got a lot more eyes on him. So he could go 7th round, but without question, he's going to be a priority free agent for a lot of teams.
Like that. And we got Josh Williams for the Chiefs in the NFL showing that, hey, he's HBCU school's got some talent. Just got to come and look and see what they got. Now, before we get to that break, there's a kind of a quarterback prospect recently that's gotten some steam that it is probably a little bit polarizing behind the doors for NFL teams. And that's Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. I've seen the stuff on Twitter recently where, I think this time of year, people have dug past the first round guys and they're starting to get into, some of the guys that maybe won't go day one. I think Spencer Rattler absolutely falls into that tier. But talent-wise, I think when you watch him play at South Carolina, you can still see some of the reasons why he was a top recruit when he got to Oklahoma for his first year. He was outstanding. To start off his second year, he was over Caleb Williams on the depth chart. I know, there's some seniority stuff there, and he did end up losing the job due to some pretty shaky play. But there's something there. I think he's got some off the field and some stuff that he's going to have to figure out with teams before they feel comfortable spending maybe a premium pick on him. But just as far as the skills go, where would you put him with the other quarterbacks in this class?
Yeah, so Spencer's really, really interesting. And I did South Carolina's pro day. I was on site there a couple of weeks ago for him, Xavier Leggett, and a couple of other guys that they have coming out this year. And it was my first time actually interacting and meeting with him. So I talked to him before and after the pro day. I have a story a little later in a couple of seconds that I'll tell. That's really, really funny that I love, that I'll never forget. But just being there, watching his throwing session, everything's just so effortless with Spencer. He throws on balance. He's on time. He's going to be in command, telling everybody where to go. If he didn't like a route or how somebody ran it, he would tell them to redo it. And that's what you love to see, especially from a quarterback, just having that type of command, wanting to be a perfectionist, even at his pro day. And then we're talking about a guy, 2 years ago, that some people say could be the number 1 overall pick with Sam Howell. It's just funny to see how everything changes over time with the draft process. But 2 years ago, he was seeing somebody that was a candidate for the number 1 overall pick. So everybody knows that he had the talent. But just talking to Spencer before the pro day, before things really got going, and I asked him about the QB1 Netflix documentary. I had never watched it before, but I heard there wasn't a lot of great things on there about him, and it rubbed off, or he came off, his personality just wasn't great on there. But he said, just imagine putting a camera in the face of a 16 or 17-year-old knowing I'm the number 1 prospect in the country. He said, I just wasn't very mature back then. And that's something that I've told teams at the combine. I'm completely different. And the experience at Oklahoma really humbled me. And that's just the type of wake-up call that I needed. But talking to Shane Beamer before the pro day, once again at the pro day about Spencer, he was like, we named him a team captain ever since he walked through the door, and he's been a model citizen ever since he's gotten here. We haven't had any hiccups or setbacks with him since he got here. But the story that I love to tell now, and this is my first time telling it. So every year I have what's called my quarterback hot board that I produce on ESPN Plus that I write up. So I have Spencer as my 7th ranked quarterback behind Penix and Nix right now. So he was like, Mr. Reid, I've been waiting to meet you. I don't know why he called me Mr., but Mr. Reid, I've been waiting to meet you. He said, I read your quarterback hot board this morning, and I saw that I was the 7th guy. And he said, that changes today. So I just love that confidence about him, and just having that type of confidence. You love to see that type in a quarterback. So just talking about his draft projection, if you're a team late 2nd, early 3rd, why not take him? So like the Rams with Stafford, we know Stafford's on the back end of his career. I think he would be a great backup to Stafford. I know they just took Stetson Bennett, but I think Rattler is a much better prospect overall than what Stetson Bennett is. But one that's really interesting to me, and we don't have to get too deep into it, but if you're like Miami, why not? Why not take somebody like Spencer Rattler as a backup? We know that Tua has a big decision coming up with the extension, if they do extend him or not. And we both know Tua has been injury prone throughout his career. So if you're looking for a high-end backup, or what I like to call a lottery ticket, if you're somebody like Miami who's stylistically similar to Tua as far as operating over the middle of the field, who can do the RPO stuff, and then you already have a plethora of weapons with Waddle and Tyreek Hill, why not take somebody like a Spencer Rattler on day two? So I think he's very, very interesting. But the confidence and the maturity that I got from him at Pro Day, I mean, I like him a lot. Now, I can't speak of what happened in the past, but just based off what he told me at Pro Day and my experience with Spencer Rattler, I definitely think he's different than what he showed on the Netflix documentary, the QB1, and then also what he showed at Oklahoma. He's just a different person now.
I will say that's totally fair. Lord knows I was not the same person at 22 as I was at 16. From as I turned 30 in a couple of months, definitely not the same person I was at 22, for good reasons. So yeah, I think that people should get a chance to change and grow. And look, I watched tape. I'm excited. The only thing I really have a question mark about with him is what happened at the combine, dude. Like, why are you out here running a 5-second 40? I just don't think he's that slow. Well, I'll never confuse him for Lamar Jackson or, Justin Fields. But hey, I think he's a little faster than a 5.0. So we'll have to see what happens there. I gotta say, I think he's one of the most fascinating, not only just like draft range outcomes, but also like the outcomes of what his career can be in the future, because he does have a bunch of potential. I think a good spot for him, like the Rams would be a great spot for him. Anywhere where he can sit and just figure out how to be professional for a little bit, because the upside's there and it's worth tapping into. They just got to figure it out. Last thing before we get to an ad break and close up the show, Jayden Daniels in the LC Pro Day, you're slated to go out there later this week. Not sure Jayden's working out. And I think that the more interesting part about that is it kind of leads into this whole thing where are guys just going to like not do this if they don't want to? Because Marvin Harrison has totally opted out of basically the entire pre-draft process outside of interviews and weighing in at the combine. He's opted out. Malik Neighbors, Jayden Daniels, they didn't do anything at the combine either. I think that, especially for Jayden Daniels, this weigh-in is pretty damn important for him as he starts to give some hope that he can be a guy that can sustain a heavier weight and not be someone that's, a bigger injury risk at the NFL level. So I guess what I want to ask you is, if we exist in a world where Jayden Daniels and Malik Neighbors don't want to work out, how much does that affect their draft stock this year?
I'm so glad you brought this up, just because I've been begging to talk about it. I had a long talk with the scout yesterday about it, and how I put it to him is that I think we're in the stage now. You remember when Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey opted out of the bowl game? I think it was, I don't remember what year they came out.
It was like 2017 draft, 2018 draft.
Yeah, all these drafts run together, man. But I think we're in that stage now with the combine as where they were with bowl games. Just because if you remember, it was super frowned upon. Everybody said that, it's going to tank their draft stock. Why are they doing this? So I think we're in that infancy stage of players, highly ranked players, I should say, bona fide top 10 to top 15 players of just really skipping out of the combine and potentially pro days. So what I think is going to happen is, if I'm a prospect and I see Marvin Harrison Jr. skip out on all this stuff, Jayden Daniels, Malik Neighbors not really doing anything, and they still go top 10 or top 15 or even higher, why would I go out and do this stuff if it's not negatively affecting my draft stock? Just like what we saw with Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette with those bowl games. Now, I mean, day three guys are opting out of bowl games just because they feel as if it's not going to help their draft stock. And then also they don't want to get hurt either. Not saying that's going to happen with the draft. Day two, day three guys, they absolutely should go out there and go through the gauntlet of what is the NFL Combine and the pre-draft process. But just speaking more so of top 10 to top 15 projected type players. And I actually thought it was going to happen after COVID. If you remember when Jamar Chase didn't play his final year, Penei Sewell, I think he sat out his final year too. I thought it potentially was going to happen after that just because we didn't have a combine. And both of those guys ended up going inside the top 10, but it didn't. But now what's going to happen now, 3 to 4 years from now, those top 15 to top 10 to top 15 players, they're probably just going to skip out on everything. And I hate that as a draft guy, but just putting myself in their shoes, why would I go out and do all this training for my body, 3 to 4 months to train for the combine, to train for my pro day, when I can tell these teams what Marvin has done? Just go watch the tape and I'll see y'all on draft day. If I'm still going to go top 10, why would I go through all that stuff? So I think we're in the infancy stages of that potentially happening 3 to 4 years consistently down the line, just speaking of top 15 players.
Yeah, it's interesting because I really do feel like as you get older, you can start to see like some of the risk involved in all this stuff. Like I remember I was watching a few years ago, the first Georgia title run when they played Michigan in the college football playoff. And Brock Bowers, for people who hadn't watched Georgia games, that was kind of his introduction to the national stage. Mm-hmm. He was awesome. He was a freshman in that game. I was watching that game with my dad, or maybe he sent me a highlight or something of Brock Bowers making a crazy catch along the sideline and run through. He's like, how old is this kid? I was like, he's 18. He's like, oh, if that were you, that'd be your last college football game. I was like, we're sitting out for 2 years. We're going to get this NFL money at the end of it, which is a huge shift from like how people, like the fact that that thought would even enter someone's mind. And it's not just that, like it's the COVID year where I think they showed like Penei Sewell, Michael Parsons, Jamar Chase. You can sit out a season, go top 10 and ball like immediately if you're that kind of guy. So, I think with Marvin is interesting because, we haven't really had someone just totally opt out of the pre-draft process like this before. I don't think it will matter for Marvin, but it might matter for the next Marvin. Like if Marvin Jr. shows up this year and doesn't play all that well, and maybe he confirms some of the concerns people have about his long speed or whatever. Maybe that ends up hurting like the next guy. But for what he's doing now, it won't hurt him at all. Maybe Jayden Daniels or Malik Neighbors to a certain extent, maybe they're at a little bit more risk. But even then, like they're both considered locks for like the top 12 at worst. So I really do think it's gonna be interesting to track what happens next and how seriously like these top guys just take the draft process at all. Because we're kind of at a point where, hey, if the film says you can ball, then these teams might just say, let's roll the dice. We're gonna get to a quick ad break, word from our sponsors, and we're gonna come back and talk about a couple of the new rules and changes that the NFL will be implementing this year. Okay, we are back with ESPN's Jordan Reid. We got to talk about some news from the weekend, some NFL rule changes. The first one, which I actually really like. I think if you watched the XFL, you saw how this could play out. The XFL that happened, at the beginning of COVID in 2020. The new kickoff rules have been announced. Receiving team blockers will stand on their own 35-yard line. The kicking team tacklers will stand on the opponent's 40-yard line. So if you need like a visualization of this in your head, they will be standing 5 yards apart from each other. Basically everyone except the kicker and the returnman. The returnman will stay back. The kicker will stay back. And you have basically 5 yards to just block someone and see if you can get someone out the way. Some XFL teams got creative by like running reverses and, figuring out how to run plays from these formations. But this is an effort to cut down on what is one of the most dangerous plays in kickoff. You were a quarterback, so I don't know if you ever got to experience the front lines of kickoff or, playing up back. That stuff is kind of scary. I'm not going to lie to you. Because one, it's, okay, someone's going to be running at me full speed, right? And I have to make this block. And I really have to make a split-second decision. What is worse? The shame of me missing this block or the shame of me like potentially getting decleated if this guy who's running and I have to turn around and block him is much stronger and much faster than me. Like there's a lot of risk for injury on this play. So I think it's a good idea, and I think it'll be interesting to watch how it plays out. What are your thoughts on just the new kickoff rules that have been approved today?
Yeah, and back in our day, like there was no crackback blocks or anything like that. So
we had wedges, bro.
Peel back. Yeah, you're seeing dudes peel back and just decleat people. So it was it's really funny to see like how far along football has come, especially from a special teams aspect. But I think it adds another layer to special teams just because there's so many different ways you can get creative with it. Like we're seeing the XFL with reverses and all these other creative ways that they have really gone with special teams. But your kickers better brush up on their tackling skills just because there's probably going to be a lot more guys in the open field too. So once again, it adds another layer to the kicking game. But also I'm really interested to see how creative these special team coordinators get, just because I think there's going to be a lot of things that we have not seen before, especially with the kickoff team really being set. There's a lot of different things that they can draw up. So there's a lot of different things that I'm looking forward to seeing how they get creative with it.
Yeah, I'll never forget the first game we played in college. I played Gettysburg College. We played against Misericordia University. And my boy Mike, he was same class as me, so we were freshmen, about to play our first college football game, and Mike was on kickoff team. And this boy was so excited to play his first college football game. So, like
I already know where this is going.
And look, and bro, he was a man of God too. Like the most holy person, didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't curse. But when he put on that helmet, bro, I don't know what happened to him. And he's running down the field on kickoff. And you've ever seen that meme of like the Simpsons character Ralph, like where he's just jumping through the glass window head first and like saying, I'm here. That's basically how he got down on kickoff. So somehow like he knifes his way past the first guy that blocks him. He gets untouched to the kickoff returner and just dives like head first. He blew both of them up at the same time. Like he got a really bad concussion. He just stood up like all woozy and started walking to the wrong sideline. Like Mike, we're over here. We're over here. So you think of stories like that, and I'm like, okay, maybe this rule has some credence. All right, maybe we don't need to be running 20 miles an hour at each other. You can get a little 5-yard. And really becomes 2.5 yards because both you guys are running each other, and that's much safer for everyone. Speaking of safety, hip drop tackle ban. You played football in college as well. And I gotta say, man, when I looked, I understand the intention here, because I do think when you look at specifically a play like the Mark Andrews injury that happened late in the season, that's something that can be avoided because, you're like dragging, and when they talk about the unweighting yourself, like basically just making yourself dead weight so that this player will fall, and you usually end up in an awkward spot where you're behind someone and their leg gets trapped under you as you are becoming dead weight, which is a lot of weight. Even as strong as NFL players are, if a 250-pound linebacker just falls on your ankle, that's probably not going to be a good situation. But watching some of the videos that they used as like examples, some of them just look like what we've been taught are clean open field tackles a lot of the time. And I just don't. And to the NFL's credit, they did say this is going to be very difficult, but I think they just might have bit off a little bit more than they can chew with the hip drop stuff. I don't know. I think it's just going to be a little bit too convoluted, and these things happen so fast in real time. I'm not really sure how you're going to get all of it all the way through.
I think that's going to be the difficult part, is how are they going to enforce it? Just because we both know from a game-to-game basis, there's going to be some good examples and some bad examples. Or why wasn't it called in this game and it was called in this game? So, and I forget who tweeted it out, but somebody said the enforcement is really going to be more so fines as compared to flags. So maybe they'll be a little bit more lenient with flags in games, and then they'll fine guys more so for it, which in itself is still bad in my opinion. But what's going to be really interesting is just how they enforce it. But the NFL is just so experimental with these things, and they kind of overreact a lot of times, in my opinion. It's because I think it happened maybe 3 or 4 years now ago now where they reviewed pass interference. You remember that, where PI was reviewed
for a hot second,
and it was and it was absolutely a disaster. So I don't know if it's going to be that type of example, and I think they're just experimenting with it for 1 year, from what I read anyway. So maybe it's a one and done rule, but I think the interesting thing to watch is how they enforce it and what examples that happen in games next year to determine what happens in future years, or if they just do away with it as a whole.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, I like last year with the roughing, unnecessary roughness fines that would come after the game where it wasn't called. That happened a handful of times last year, and I know from speaking to them, there were a lot of players that were unhappy about that because, like, damn, bro, like, we're doing something that you don't even think about in the middle of a game. Where, like, there was a good example where Patrick Ricard, you can look it up, he kind of, he played fullback and he filled the hole and crushed a linebacker, and guess he kind of hit him with his face mask, and next thing there's no flag call in the field, but next thing you know, you get a $30,000 bill that's shut up to your house.
Like, what do you want me to do?
What do you want me to do? How this happens? So I really do hope that, the fines are annoying, but I gotta be honest, at the end of the day, that ain't my money. So I'm not really too concerned about that. I think it's unfortunate for the players, but I'm really just concerned about what happens if we find ourselves in, like, a playoff game or a week 17 divisional game, like high stakes, high leverage stuff. And you end up having a game that is, extended because of something like this. Because we've all, it's I will say it's a good thing Tom Brady's not playing anymore, because Tom Brady will be getting a lot of, wait until that 4th and 17 when the Patriots need to go for it, and you get a hip drop tackle at 15 yards, and next thing you know, automatic first down. I really just don't want that, because I think when you start looking at really just where the integrity of sports is right now, as far as gambling stuff. We just saw a Portland Trail Blazers player get in trouble with keeping people involved with the integrity of the game and feeling like the outcome is fair, I think is really, really important right now. So I hope that this doesn't get in the way of that, because the conspiracy crowd is loud right now. So let's be careful with that, NFL. Roger Goodell, I know you're listening to this podcast. I know you're a faithful listener, so heed my words. Listen to me now. Thank me later. And the last one, coaches get a third challenge if they get one correct. I don't like this. I like the old rule where you have to get 2 correct to get a third. This is participation trophy challenges. What do you think?
I disagree. I actually like you should be rewarded if you get one of those right. I don't understand why this wasn't a rule earlier. So I disagree. I actually like this one.
Yeah. Okay. This can stay if we can review the hip drop tackles, because as of now they can't be reviewed. So that's a happy medium.
They just passed another. I don't know if you saw it. So the trade deadline is after week 9 now.
I like it.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I mean, I'm the guy that turns off the trade deadline when I start a Madden franchise. So.
Just make a late season to playoff trade.
Playoff trade. Right? Why not? Yeah. Hey, no. Well, see, what I want at some point is NFL to take on like the soccer, football in Europe style transfers or loans. Like, we're in a big playoff game. I'm the Chiefs and need a left tackle. Houston, you're out of it. Can we borrow Laramie Tunsil for a game for $10 million? I would love to see that in the NFL. I would love to see that. I don't know how many players would go up for it though, because, well, I guess it depends on how much money again. But again, it's never going to happen. All right, Jordan, before we get out of here, you want to let people know what you're working on, where you're going to be outside of the LSU Pro Day?
Yeah, so releasing a 7-round mock draft. Pray for me in the coming weeks. A full 7-round mock draft. Yeah, that'll be out April 23rd. So be on the lookout for that. And then we're coming out with weekly buzz files every week, just sharing stuff that we're hearing as we're talking to scouts, executives, and then sources that we talk to while out on the road. That's with me, my colleague Phil Yates, Matt Miller, and then also Mel Kiper Jr.
All right, so if you're in the loop for a mock draft, you can go to Yahoo for a one round mock draft and, get your takes that way. You can go to ESPN for a 7-round mock draft. And gonna pray for you, brother, because that's a lot. I remember when I was blogging for Falcoholic way back in the day, doing like a 7-round Falcons mock draft, and it's only 7 picks usually. But you get down to round 6, 7, like, dude, I don't know.
Right. Cross your fingers for no trade. So, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, if you're listening, go ahead and get the trade out the way, brother.
Please. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Exempt List. Jason Fish, Charles Robinson, and Jory Epstein will be back with an episode of Inside Coverage on Thursday. Jory has been out at owners meeting in Orlando, so I'm sure she's going to have a lot of notes. You want to check that out. We'll be back with another episode of the Exempt List next Tuesday and every Tuesday leading up to the draft. I'm Charles McDonald. You can find me on Twitter at 4verts. Jordan is on Twitter at Jordan_Reid. That's REID. And our producer, Stone Rochelle behind the glass at SJ Rochelle. And we will see you next week.